The folder on the bank manager's desk landed with a sound I had practiced in my head 100 times. My son-in-law sat across from me, and the moment he saw what was inside it, the color left his face the way water drains from a bathtub. He looked up at me, then at the manager, then back at the folder. His mouth opened, but nothing came out, and in that silence, I leaned forward slightly and said, very quietly, "Did you really think I would never look? Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story did not start in a bank office. It started on a Tuesday morning in my kitchen, the day everything changed inside me. My name is Dorothy Callahan. I am 68 years old. I have short silver hair and reading glasses I am always losing, and I spent 31 years as a registered nurse before I retired. I am not a dramatic woman. I do not enjoy conflict. I was raised in a household where you kept your voice low, you helped your family, and you did not make a fuss over things that could be smoothed over. That way of living served me well for a long time. Then it stopped serving me and started serving everyone else instead. My husband Gerald passed away 4 years ago. He went quietly in his sleep, which was a mercy, and he left me the house we had shared for 39 years. A brick house on a corner lot in Dayton, Ohio, with a maple tree in the front yard and a porch where I used to drink my coffee in the mornings. The house was paid off. It was mine. I never thought I would have to say those words out loud to defend myself, but I did, eventually. My daughter, Sarah, is 39 years old. She is sharp and funny and has her father's eyes. When she married my son-in-law, Brandon, 6 years ago, I stood at the back of that little chapel and cried the good kind of tears. Brandon was charming and tall, and he laughed easily. He called me by my first name, which I did not love, but I let it go because he seemed to make my daughter happy, and I told myself that was what mattered. For the first 2 years, things were fine. They lived in an apartment across town. They visited on Sundays. I babysat my grandson, Cooper, who was born the year after the wedding, and I loved every minute of it. That was real. That part was never complicated. The complications started when Brandon lost his job at the logistics company where he had worked for 4 years. He did not lose it slowly. He lost it all at once on a Friday, and did not tell Sarah until the following Wednesday. By then, he had already decided what came next. They were going to move in with me. Sarah called me on a Saturday afternoon. She explained it carefully, the way you explain something to a person you expect to say no. She said it would only be for a few months. She said they would save money and find a new place. She said Cooper would love spending more time with his grandmother. She was right about that last part, and it was the part that made me say yes. They moved in on a cold Saturday in March. 3 cars full of boxes, Cooper's toys scattered across my living room floor, Brandon carrying a large flat-screen television into my den without asking where I wanted it. He set it down in the corner and said, "Perfect," and turned it on. I stood in the doorway for a moment, then went to make coffee. The first 2 months were manageable. Sarah helped with dishes. Cooper and I built puzzles at the kitchen table in the mornings. Brandon was job hunting, or at least he said he was. He spent a lot of time on his laptop at the kitchen table with headphones in, and I assumed that counted. Then the small things started. Brandon began ordering takeout and having it delivered to the house, without offering to split the cost. He invited his friend Marcus over without mentioning it, and the 2 of them stayed up until 2 in the morning watching television in my den. When I came downstairs for a glass of water and found chip bags on my coffee table, Brandon looked up and said, "Sorry, Dot, we got carried away." He called me Dot. Gerald was the only person who ever called me that, and I felt something small and uncomfortable twist in my chest, but I said nothing. Sarah seemed not to notice, or she noticed and decided not to say anything either. I chose to believe it was the first one. It was easier that way. The financial part started around the 3rd month. Brandon asked to borrow my car one afternoon because his was in the shop. I said yes. He came home 4 hours later, and when I looked at the gas gauge the next morning, the tank was empty. I had filled it the week before. I said nothing. Then one evening I opened my mail and found my bank statement. There was a charge I did not recognize, $47, at a restaurant downtown I had never been to. I looked at the date. It was a Thursday. I had been home all day Thursday. I asked Sarah about it quietly. She said it must be a banking error and offered to call the bank for me. I told her I would handle it myself. When I called, the representative confirmed the charge was made with my debit card number, which had been entered manually online, not swipe. I did not tell Sarah what the bank said. I wrote the amount down on a piece of paper and put it in the drawer of my nightstand. More charges appeared over the following weeks. A streaming subscription I did not sign up for, a hardware store purchase for $62, a charge at a sporting goods store for nearly $120, each one small enough to seem like a mistake. Each one adding up. I wrote every single one down. What I did not know then was that those small charges were just the surface. Under the surface, something much larger was forming, and I would not find out about it until much later. The morning that changed everything began the way a lot of important mornings do. Quietly, I was in my kitchen making oatmeal. Sarah had already left for work. Cooper was at daycare. Brandon came downstairs in his pajamas at 10:15, poured himself a cup of the coffee I had made at 7, and sat at the kitchen table with his phone. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how I had slept. I set my oatmeal on the counter and picked up the dish towel to dry the pot I had just washed. I listened to the sound of him scrolling, the occasional tap, the exhale when he found something funny. Then his mother, Patrice, arrived. She knocked twice and walked in without waiting, which she had begun doing after the first month. She was wearing a new coat I had not seen before, and she was carrying a large paper bag from a bakery downtown that smelled like cinnamon rolls. She set the bag on my kitchen table without asking and hugged her son. They spoke for a few minutes about a resort in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I heard the word spa twice. I heard pool. I heard they have a chef. Then Brandon looked over at me and said, "Hey, so Sarah and I figured it out. We are going to take a little trip this weekend. Just the two of them. They needed time to reconnect after everything with the job stress, real important for their relationship." He smiled at me like he was doing me a favor by explaining. I looked at him. I waited. He kept going. "So we figured Cooper could stay here with you. Just Friday night through Sunday afternoon. Patrice can come by Saturday to give you a break." Patrice nodded at this like it had already been arranged and agreed upon, and all that was left was for me to understand my role. I said, "When did Sarah and I discuss this?" Brandon shrugged. "She said you would be fine with it. You love having Cooper." "I do love having Cooper," I said. "That is not the question." Patrice tilted her head and smiled in the way people smile when they want you to stop talking. "Dorothy, you have so much energy for your age. A weekend with your grandson will be good for you." For my age. For my age. There it was. I set the dish towel on the counter. I looked at the bag of cinnamon rolls she had placed on my table. I looked at Brandon, still in his pajamas at 10:15, drinking the coffee I had made, in the house I owned, discussing a vacation he was taking that I was not invited to, treating me like the arrangement had already been made and my job was simply to fall in line. Something went still inside me. Not angry still, clear still. I said, "Let me think about it," and I walked to my bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed. I thought about Gerald. He used to say, "Dottie, you let people walk on you and then wonder why your back hurts." I used to laugh at that. I was not laughing now. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out the piece of paper where I had been writing down the unauthorized charges. I looked at the list. The numbers were small individually. Together they were $412. I picked up my phone and called my bank directly. I told the representative I needed to review all recent charges on my account. As she read them back, I crossed off the ones that were mine and circled the ones that were not. When we finished, she asked, "Would you like to dispute any of these charges?" I said, "Yes. All the ones I just circled, and I would like a fraud alert placed on my account immediately." She walked me through each step. By the end of the call, a dispute had been filed, and my card had been flagged for review. I thanked her and hung up. Then I did something I had never done before. I called my attorney, a kind man named Richard, who had helped me update my will after Gerald passed. I told him what was happening. I told him people were living in my house and using my account without my permission. He listened carefully. When I finished, he said, "Dorothy, do you know the deed on your property is still in your name only?" I said yes. He said, "Good. Keep it that way. And get a copy of your full credit report. Today, if possible." I had not thought about my credit report. I wrote down the website he gave me and went to the computer in the living room. Brandon and Patrice were still at the kitchen table. I could hear them talking about the resort menu. I pulled up my credit report and began to read. What I found made me sit back in my chair very slowly. There was an inquiry. A hard inquiry from a mortgage lending company, dated 6 weeks earlier. I had not contacted any mortgage company. I had not applied for any loan. But the inquiry was there, attached to my social security number, my address, my financial history. My hands felt cold. I printed the report and took it back to my bedroom. I read it again. Then I called Richard back. He was quiet for a moment when I told him. Then he said, "Dorothy, I need you to call that lender directly. Find out what was applied for, and in whose name." I found the number on the printed report. A representative picked up on the second ring. I gave her my name and social security number. She pulled up the account. There was a moment of typing. Then she said, carefully, "Mrs. Callahan, there is an application for a home equity line of credit associated with your property. It was submitted 6 weeks ago. The co-applicant listed is Brandon Mercer, my son-in-law." I pressed my hand flat against my knee to stop it from shaking. "How much?" I asked. "The application was for $80,000, she said. "It has not been finalized. It is still under review pending a signed authorization form. We sent that form to your address 3 weeks ago." I thought about the mail. Brandon had taken to collecting the mail from the box when he came back from his walks. He said he was happy to help. He had been intercepting my mail. He had submitted a loan application in my name against my house, and he was waiting for a document to arrive so he could sign it and finalize it. My house. The house Gerald and I paid off together. The house I had lived in for 39 years. I thanked the representative. I asked her to freeze the application immediately and note that I had not authorized it. She said she would flag it and advised me to contact the Federal Trade Commission to report potential identity theft. She also said I could request that law enforcement be contacted directly by the lending company. I said, "Please do all of that." When I hung up, I sat very still for a long moment. Outside my bedroom door, I could hear Patrice laughing at something. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the fact that she had left for work this morning, not knowing what her husband had been doing in this house. Or maybe she did know, and I was the last to find it out. I did not let myself decide which one was true yet. I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder where I kept property documents. I found the deed, my name, only my name, Gerald Callahan and Dorothy Callahan, and Gerald's name crossed through in the transfer after he passed. Just me now. I found the folder with my bank statements from the past 6 months. I put them with the printed credit report and the list of unauthorized charges. I put everything in a large brown envelope. I wrote Richard's name on the front. Then I went back to the kitchen. Brandon and Patrice looked up when I came in. "Brandon," I said, "I need to speak with Sarah this evening. Can you ask her to come home directly after work?" He looked mildly annoyed, like I had interrupted something. "Sure," he said. "Everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I am just getting organized." That night, Sarah came home at 6:15. She walked in the door and kissed Cooper on the top of his head and looked at me with that slightly tired expression she had been wearing for months now, the expression of a woman carrying more than she wanted to say. I asked her to sit with me in the kitchen after dinner. When Cooper was in his room and Brandon had gone downstairs, I put the envelope on the table between us. She opened it slowly. She read the credit report first. I watched her face. The tired expression changed. Something behind her eyes shifted. She looked up. "What is this inquiry?" I explained. I watched her read the rest. I watched her reach the page where the lender had noted the application for $80,000 against my property. She stopped reading. She put the paper face down on the table. I did not say anything. I let the silence do the work. "Did you know?" I asked. She shook her head. Her eyes were filling. "He told me he was looking into some refinancing options," she whispered. "He said it was research. He said he was trying to find ways to help." "Help whom?" I asked gently. She did not answer. I put my hand over hers. "I need you to understand something," I said. "This is my house. I want you here. I love having Cooper here, but I cannot let this continue." She started to cry then. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that means something real is happening underneath. The next morning, I called Richard's office and went in. I brought the envelope. He reviewed everything carefully and then said, "Dorothy, this constitutes attempted mortgage fraud. You have strong grounds to report this to law enforcement." He walked me through every option. I listened to all of them before I said anything. At the end I said, "I want to go to the bank first, the lending company. I want to sit across from someone and make sure this is completely documented. And I want Brandon there." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You want him there?" "I want him to see his own name on those papers," I said. "I want to see his face." Richard arranged a meeting with the lending company's fraud department for the following Friday morning. He contacted them on my behalf and explained the situation. They were cooperative and thorough. They had seen cases like this before, they told Richard, more than people would believe. I did not tell Brandon what the meeting was about. I told him I needed him to come with me, to handle some paperwork related to the house. I told him it was routine. I told him I wanted family there for support, that the whole thing made me a little anxious, all that official language. He agreed easily. He even offered to drive. We sat in the bank's parking lot for a moment before going in. The morning was cold and grey. Brandon was in a good mood. He had gotten a call back from a company in Columbus, and he was talking about it, about the salary range, about how things were turning around. I nodded and listened and said, "I am glad things are looking up." We went inside together. The folder on the bank manager's desk landed with a sound I had practiced in my head 100 times. Brandon looked at it, and then at the manager, a careful woman named Mrs. Howell, who had been in fraud investigation for over 20 years. Mrs. Howell did not waste any time. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "you are listed as a co-applicant on a home equity loan application filed 6 weeks ago against this property, which belongs solely to Dorothy Callahan. Mrs. Callahan has confirmed she did not authorize this application. She also did not authorize you to intercept her mail or act as her financial representative in any capacity. Can you tell me how your name came to be on this application?" Brandon's mouth opened. He looked at me. I looked back at him without flinching. He said, "This is a misunderstanding. We talked about this. Dorothy and I discussed investment options." Mrs. Howell looked at me. "Mrs. Callahan?" I said. "We never discussed this. I have never spoken to him about a home equity loan. I did not know this application existed until I pulled my credit report." Brandon shifted in his chair. He laughed once, a short, uncomfortable sound. "Dorothy, come on. You said you wanted to do something useful with the equity in the house. You said that." I said it calmly. "I never said that. And if I had, that would still not give you permission to file an application in my name." The room got very quiet. Mrs. Howell explained that the application was being formally voided and that the matter was being referred to the appropriate authorities. She told Brandon that using another person's financial information without explicit written consent constituted fraud under both state and federal law. She said this clearly and without emotion, the way someone says something they have said many times before. Brandon stopped talking. His good mood was completely gone. He looked at the table, then at the door, then at me again. "You set me up," he said quietly. His voice had changed. "I did not set you up," I replied. "I found out what you were doing and I stopped it." He pushed his chair back and stood up. "Sarah is going to hear about this. She already knows," I said. That stopped him. He sat back down slowly. The rest of the meeting took about 40 minutes. I signed documents. Mrs. Howell explained next steps. A formal report would be filed. I would receive copies of everything. A flag would remain on my account and my credit profile for ongoing protection. When it was over, Brandon and I walked out of the building separately. He sat in his car for a long time in the parking lot. I called Richard from the sidewalk and told him it had gone exactly as we discussed. That evening was difficult in the way that honest evenings are difficult. Sarah came home to a husband who was scared and a mother who was done pretending. The three of us sat in the living room while Cooper slept, and the whole truth came out in pieces, the way it always does. Brandon talked for a long time. He said he felt like a failure. He said the pressure of not working had been crushing him. He said his mother kept asking about his plans, and he had nothing to say. He said he had convinced himself that the house had more than enough equity and that we could all benefit from it, that he could start a business and pay everything back before I ever noticed. I let him finish. Then I said, "You felt like a failure, so you decided to use my house to fix it, without asking me." He looked at the floor. Sarah was sitting very still beside him. When she spoke, her voice was controlled but her hands were not. She said, "You told me you were researching options. You let me think you were helping." He started to say something, but she shook her head once and he stopped. I looked at my daughter, the daughter whose eyes were exactly like her father's, and I said, "I am not pressing charges. I made that decision before I walked into that bank this morning, but I need this to be over." Sarah looked at me. "What does that mean?" "It means you and Brandon need to find your own place to live. Not because I do not love you, because I need my house to be mine again." She nodded slowly. She understood. I could see it in her face, that she had known this was coming, maybe longer than she wanted to admit. Brandon said, "I will pay back every charge on your account. Every cent. I said. I know you will. Richard will draw up an agreement. He nodded. Patrice called that night. She had heard from Brandon, and she had opinions. She told me I was being cold. She told me family had to stick together. She told me that I would be lonely in this house without them. I waited until she finished. Then I said, Patrice, I love my daughter and my grandson. I am not doing this to be cold. I am doing this because someone used my identity to try to take my home from me, and I choose not to pretend that did not happen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he would have paid it back. Maybe, I said. But he never asked. I heard her exhale. You know, she said. Brandon has always felt like you never fully accepted him. I thought about that. Then I said, I accepted him completely. I let him live in my home. I never asked for rent. I never made him feel unwelcome. Accepting someone does not mean accepting everything they do. She hung up without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, Sarah and Brandon moved into a rental house on the east side of town. It was smaller than what they were used to, and it did not have a garage, and it was entirely theirs. I helped Sarah pack Cooper's things on a Wednesday morning. We did not talk very much, but we stayed close to each other in the way that mothers and daughters do when they are processing something they are not ready to say yet. Before she left, Sarah stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked around at the room she had eaten breakfast in 1,000 times as a child. Mom, she said, I should have seen it. You trusted him, I said. That is not a flaw. She crossed the room and hugged me, not a quick hug, the long kind. I held her for a moment. I am still your mother, I said. That part does not change. She wiped her eyes. I know. After they left, I stood in my kitchen alone. The flat-screen television was gone from the den. The extra coffee cups were gone from the cabinet. The house sounded different, the way a room sounds when furniture has been moved, and you can hear the space again. I put on the coffee maker. I looked out the window at the maple tree in the front yard. The leaves were just starting to come in, that bright early spring green that only lasts a week or two before it deepens. I thought about all the months I had stayed quiet, about the charged dinners and the borrowed car and the mail I had not opened myself. I thought about how silence had felt like patience, and how patience had almost cost me my home. I thought about Gerald, about something he used to say whenever I let something go for too long. He would look at me very seriously and say, Dottie, you can be generous or you can be invisible, but not both. Choose one. I had been invisible for long enough. 3 weeks after they moved out, I had my locks changed, not because I was angry, because it was my house and I had every right to. And it occurred to me that I should have done it years ago, as simple good sense. I met with a financial advisor and set up a trust for the property. I had the deed reviewed and added a secondary protection clause that Richard recommended. I set up alerts on every account so that any transaction over $50 sent a message directly to my phone. I called Sarah on a Sunday and asked if she wanted to bring Cooper over for lunch. She said yes without hesitating. They arrived at noon, just the two of them. Brandon had a work call. Cooper ran to me at the door and wrapped his arms around my knees and said, Grandma, I found a caterpillar. I said, show me. We spent an hour in the backyard, looking at every leaf and rock on the property. Sarah sat on the porch steps with her coffee and watched us. At one point, she laughed at something Cooper said, and the sound of it moved through the yard, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like myself. Over the following months, Brandon held up his end of the agreement. He made payments every month, without being reminded, for the full amount he owed. Sarah told me he had started working with a financial counselor. She said he was different, quieter, more careful with his words. I chose to believe her because she had never given me a reason not to. At Thanksgiving, I invited them all to the house. It was the first time we had all been in the same room since everything had happened. Brandon arrived with a pie he had made himself, which Sarah later told me he had attempted 3 times to get right. He handed it to me at the door and said, Dorothy, I owe you more than this. I know that. I took the pie and said, come inside. It is cold. We sat at the table in the dining room where I had eaten every holiday meal for 39 years. Cooper sat next to me and told me about his preschool teacher. The pie was actually quite good. After dinner, when the dishes were done and Cooper was falling asleep on the couch, Brandon came to stand beside me in the kitchen. He said, I want you to know I understand what I did. Not just legally, what it meant. I dried a glass and set it on the shelf. What did it mean? I asked. He took a moment. It meant I saw you as a resource instead of a person, he said. His voice was steady, but I could see it cost him something to say it. Yes, I said. It did. He nodded. I am sorry. I looked at him. I forgive you, I said. That is not the same as forgetting. But it is what I choose. He left the kitchen without saying anything else, but I thought I heard him exhale for the first time in a long time, like a person who had been holding their breath for months. That night, after everyone went home, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea even though it was cold. The neighborhood was quiet. The maple tree stood dark against the sky. I thought about the women I had known throughout my nursing career, the patients who came in quietly and left quietly, who endured things without complaint because they believed silence was a virtue. I had been that woman. I had thought staying soft meant staying safe. What I know now is this. Silence does not protect you. It only tells the people around you that the door is open. The bravest thing I did was not confronting my son-in-law in that bank office, though I will admit that felt satisfying in a way I had not expected. The bravest thing was much smaller than that. It was picking up the phone, alone in my bedroom, with shaking hands, and deciding that what was mine was worth protecting. If you have stayed quiet because you were afraid that speaking up would cost you the people you love, I want you to hear this. The people who truly love you will still be there after you find your voice. And the ones who disappear when you stop being convenient were never really staying for you. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it, because sometimes the most powerful thing a grandmother can say is simply, "This is mine, and I know it."